Hi everyone, it's Clare Batkin from Your OT Tutor. This presentation is called A Novel Systematic Approach to National Disability Insurance Scheme Report Writing, or what I like to call the 10 Steps to NDIS Report Writing Success. So in this presentation, I'm going to share a 10-step process that I follow when teaching any allied health clinician how to write an NDIS report. Now, if you're not an NDIS OT and you've somehow stumbled across this recording by accident, don't leave yet because I'm hoping that the steps of this process will actually be applicable to writing a report for any sort of funding body. So stick around, and if it's helpful, let me know because I'd like to know that feedback. So let's start with the first question. Why is NDIS report writing so difficult? And it does come down to two types of reasons. The first is the NDIS processes themselves. So templates aren't available for every type of report, and let's face it, those that are available could hardly be called helpful. There's also no consistency with standards, with the best report being knocked back, while something really basics gets overfunded. And lately, there's also been a lot of cut and paste rejection reasons, with the most detailed reports being dismissed with the excuse, not enough evidence. Now, unfortunately, those are things that are not within our control, but the next list is. So while it's easy to get angry at the NDIS's broken systems, we need to remember that not all OT reports are perfect. As part of my business, I provide external supervision and report review services, and I've also had experience completing medico-legal NDIA assessments as an independent OT, which means I get to see many different types of OT reports. I got to see what inconsistencies and gaps lawyers would pick on as well at that higher level. Sometimes it's that our reports have weak evidence, they have unclear clinical reasoning, and as a result, clinicians don't feel confident to back themselves when the NDIA does say no, and inevitably the participant moves on to another OT to try again, and the cycle continues. We end up with participants with lots of assessments and reports, but no real outcomes. And when that happens too often, it also threatens the reputation of the OT profession itself. So why is this happening? Why are there gaps in our NDIS reports? What I'm going to show you is that essentially it's because OTs were trying to start the report writing process somewhere back here. They do some basic information gathering, then attempt to start writing to smash it out as quickly as they could. So if you've seen the Just Write Me a Letter scenario presentation that I've shared as well, clinicians weren't starting in the best place. They needed to start back here at the start. But when it came to training and supervision in relation to NDIS report writing, this was where the focus was too, on the tips and the tricks for formatting and formulating sentences at that back at the writing stage. But based on the gaps that I'd seen in my report reviews, the formatting and language wasn't necessarily the problem. It was the gaps in the information gathering process, which led to gaps in the clinical reasoning process when forming our recommendations. And all these initial OT process steps were being missed. So I decided that an approach was needed that taught all these bits first, especially for the early career clinicians who hadn't consolidated solid OT assessment processes yet, before we then move on to teaching the tips and tricks needed for the NDIS. So these were my 10 steps to NDIS report writing success. Now, the disclaimer is unfortunately, it can't guarantee funding success at the moment because we know how inconsistent the NDIS is. But in this case, success looks like building a solid report based on strong clinical reasoning and evidence that you're confident in. So you do have the guts to back yourself and say, nope, the evidence is there. Let's go for that appeal the next time that the NDIA does inevitably knock it back. So I'm going to run you through these steps now, but you can access this framework as well as lots of other NDIS report writing resources on my website, and I'll share the link to that at the end. So step one is to determine the purpose of the report. For OTs who are occupationally focused, this should be pretty easy for us to nail the true purpose. It's not about what support is needed, but the functional outcome that we want that support to achieve. So the purpose of a report isn't to get a new wheelchair. Is to get a new wheelchair to allow the client to mobilise in their home and to access their community independently. It's not that we want more OT capacity building hours. We want more OT capacity hours so they can achieve what? If we get clear on this, it makes the remainder of the report so much easier because all our justifications tie back to that outcome. Step two is to decide the report type. So this is probably easier said than done given the ever-changing NDIS processes, new replacement supports and plan variation options. But based on some discussions with some other NDIS OTs, we can usually take an educated guess and at least get the report that we need to write right 90% of the time. Step 3 is to discuss expectations with the referrer. So this is actually something that we may be thinking is a bit more of a customer service type feature, but again, it's actually a key part of the collaborative and client-centered and process and prioritizing communication with our clients and stakeholders. Once we know what report and processes we need to complete, we need to be clear about how long that will take to write so the participant or referrer, usually like a support coordinator, can decide if there'll be enough funds available to write that report and if we'll be able to meet their time frame. Keeping in mind that what one OT does for one plan review could be very different to what another OT does for somebody else's plan review, or even what the same OT does for different clients. So we need to be really clear and so that we can flag any issues early in terms of meeting those expectations. The next two steps are probably the most crucial part, but unfortunately, the part that is often overlooked. Gather your evidence. I can't say it enough. So often the gaps I come across are because there isn't clear enough evidence to support clinical reasoning. It needs to be more than just asking our client what's difficult for them and what help they would like. So yes, we do start with this as client-centered OTs, we should, but the NDIA will value so much more what we see versus what others report to us. And this was a big learning from the medico-legal report writing that I was doing and having the opportunity to see what NDIS lawyers' letters were asking for and what they were picking on. They basically wanted to know how much we saw ourselves. So make sure that you see enough so that you can be confident what's causing the functional issue. Is it a physical issue, cognitive, psychosocial, or the consequences of a burnt out carer? Next, if we do some good information gathering, this bit will naturally follow, which is step 5, to check your reasoning and determine your recommendations. For other reports, we need to think about what are the requirements of that scheme. But for the NDIS, it's all about the reasonable and necessary criteria. In particular, how can you prove effective and beneficial? So the deeper dive into the information gathering will help you understand this, plus some extra literature research doesn't hurt. The NDIA also care about value for money. It's probably what we think they probably care about the most, to be honest. Have you considered all the other similar options that could be cheaper and achieve the same outcomes? As funding becomes tighter, we need to do this to show that we've already considered the less frequent option, less trained, less customized options, and why they aren't suitable. At this stage, you may be putting some dot points into your report template, but don't try to make it perfect and definitely don't jump to writing the recommendations unless you're super confident in all these other first steps. The next phase is report writing. So step 6 is to understand your audience, which is a crucial part of any type of report writing. We need to consider the audience. So in this case, most of the time it will be an NDIS planner. The key is that their time is limited and they often have limited disability knowledge. So what you could do is make yourself an avatar here like Skeptical Sam and pretend you're writing to him. It will remind you to avoid jargon, to keep your language plain, and in future steps, keep it really clear and brief so that someone with no time can skim read it and still find the most crucial information clearly. Next, we need to make sure that all the time we've spent on information gathering and checking our reasoning isn't wasted. You need to make sure that your reasoning is clear and in line with NDIS requirements. So this unfortunately means being quite impairment focused. So we can't say Kylie can independently make a sandwich once set up and prompted. We need to say Kylie requires setup and prompting to make a sandwich. It also means that we need to be really specific. So we don't write Sam wakes up multiple times per night. We write Sam wakes up 5 times each night, requiring 20 minutes of one-to-one help to resettle. And then we need to highlight the risks. So we can do this in writing, but sometimes a photo of a carer in a precarious manual handling position can speak 1,000 words. Now that the detail is there, we need to refine it even further to ensure that the planner with no time has no excuse not to find it. And I know they'll always have plenty of excuses, but make it your mission that your formatting is not the problem. So you do this by having clear formatting with white space and dot points so that it can be skim read, with clear section and subheadings with key points in bold, so no slabs of text in long paragraphs. It also means paying attention to detail, so triple checking AT quotes before cutting and pasting details. And if you're starting with a template, checking that all those placeholders have updated before you finalize the report. Now we're on the home straight with the review stage. So you may think the report's written, done, press submit, don't want to think about it again. But this is where another key issue sometimes arises. Reports are submitted, but there was no discussion with the client or stakeholder to check if you had interpreted the information they provided correctly and that your recommendations are acceptable to them. Now, it's important to know that this isn't just about letting them check your report so that they can rewrite your recommendations into their own wish list. It's about having a collaborative conversation to come up with a solution that will work, that's in line with your reasoning, but also acceptable for them to try. If it's not, then you keep that discussion going until you come up with a solution. It's also not underestimating the value of a fresh set of eyes. So yes, definitely a new grad should be having someone read over their reports, but even experienced OTs can find value in this, even if it's from a clinician of a different discipline. Can someone who isn't familiar with your client see the value in what you've recommended? Can they easily find the information that they need to come to that conclusion? And if not, how do you expect an NDIA planner to? And then the final step 10, which involves submitting the report, but keep in mind that process itself isn't straightforward at the moment. Consider what other reports are going in. Will it trigger a plan review? Is now actually the right time? Once it is in though, put it in your diary when you're expecting to hear back and follow up. Also make sure that your client knows what good follow-up looks like. Should they be keeping you in the loop? Do they need to call you when AT is being delivered? And inevitably, when you're fiddling with an NDIS template and writing a new report, there will be a tweak or two along the way. So what you might do is you might add a new assessment tool, you might reference a new research article. What you can do is take 2 minutes to add these changes to your master template so that the next time you write an FCA, you don't need to go back and find these details again and add it in. And then by all means, celebrate a job well done. And no, confetti is definitely not overdoing it. So now what's next? If you found this helpful, I'd encourage you to visit my website and download all the free resources, watch the free recordings. There's a video walkthrough. There's also a quick guide planning tool that shows you an example of this 10-step process in terms of submitting an application for a Power Assist wheelchair. There's lots of other report writing NDIS recordings as well. Invest in some training for yourself or your team. So this could be in terms of the self-paced online courses I've got or some in-house training within the team environment. But just make sure you consider what will be most effective for the individual learner's needs. You can also share this 10-step process with other allied health colleagues because while it does fit very well with an OT process, the steps really are applicable to any NDIS clinician. It's all about solid information gathering to inform your clinical reasoning. And then finally, even if you don't jump onto the resources, hopefully this presentation has helped to prompt all the supervisors out there to reframe how you're teaching early career clinicians. Don't just jump to the NDIS tips and tricks. Use teaching report writing as an opportunity to teach the OT process. If there are gaps in their reasoning, don't just give them the answer, actually help them figure it out themselves through more information gathering. I know this takes time and the argument will be that we don't have that time, but if we don't invest in teaching this, it will just cost us more time in slower report writing and poor report outcomes that we'll just have to do again anyway. So teach it right from the start. Hopefully this was helpful. All my details are there on the slide. If you'd like to find out more, please feel free to check out the website or get in touch. Thanks for watching.